Hello, Petal. How you doing? How was your weekend? How are things going? How are you in yourself? As always, leave me a little note in the comments, and I do like our little chats that we're having in there. I know I say it every time, and I must be getting quite tedious now, but yes. So global events are getting a bit spicy, so nice little bit of escapism in here where we can just all kind of like curl up together and, you know, have a little listen to a story and reminisce about old times when we first came across the most amazing Mr. Tom Holt. And I think it's a unilateral consensus that we'll be doing Paint Your Dragon next, so that's exciting. Of course I've got it, but I'll get the ebook copy so you don't hear me flipping pages like phew, 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 phew. See, I should be a Foley artist. I can do sound effects. Thank you for your patience and consideration about my absolutely horrendous accent in the last one and my ad-lib sort of censorship on certain things. I do appreciate that, and I try not to do it, but it's just sometimes when I think, yeah, maybe that word's not the best one to be using right now. Anyway, so please, as ever, if you can hit the like button, it really helps the channel. It helps me keep the lights on and the hamsters all happy and dancing around. And also, if you can, just while I'm thinking about it, so yes, if share, subscribe, you know, notifications, bell, malargles. So when we did the live thing, we discussed that we would be doing the original Grimm's Fairy Tales, but with a little bit of an inky twist on it. Do you have any preferences of which one we start with? Or can I just kind of like wing it and do the first one in the book and then rewrite the script just a smeety speech? Or I could ad-lib it on the fly and we could do it as a live thing and just have fun having a giggle about me trying to ad-lib to a traditional story and trying to make it acceptable to have online as a live. That should be absolutely hilarious, I think. But then again, I don't get out much. Okie dokie, lovely beans. Let's do this thing. Chapter 5, Faust Among Equals, by the amazing, the illustrious, the fantastic, and the most wonderful Mr. Tom Holt. Chapter 5. Thanks to the research carried out in the last 20-odd years, it's now tolerably well known that once they reach the stage of being able to make articulate sounds, all babies, regardless of nationality, ethnic grouping or environment, make virtually the same noises. Far from being meaningless gurgles, these noises are the only words human beings ever get to speak on their own basic, unpolluted, indigenous language, of which the myriad tongues of mankind are mere vulgar and corrupt dialects. Within weeks of finding their voices, human infants begin the long process of soaking up the stimuli of their immediate surroundings, and by the time they reach 5 months old, the old language has been supplanted in their centres of speech by the variant they will usually speak and think in for the rest of their lives. What they are saying in those initial weeks of vocalisation is, "You bastards, get me back up there immediately!" The old language is, of course, not confined to the newly born. It is also the lingua franca of the dead, the immortal and the ineffable. And magicians, necromancers and conjurers also speak it, albeit with an accent that makes them sound like the Germans in war films. For the convenience of our readers, we shall ignore this and translate simultaneously as we proceed. "Ronnie, old mate," said Lucky George, "wonderful to hear from you. How in buggery did you get my number?" In his office in Pandemonium, Hieronymus Bosch glanced furtively about him and cupped his hand tight around the receiver. "Shut up and listen," he hissed. "I'm only doing this because I owe you one, right? Remember that. If they catch me, my life won't be worth..." He hesitated. "Sorry, Freudian slip. Anyway, they'll bloody well crucify me. Look, George, they're on to you." "They are?" "Believe it. I got this number from your dossier. Okay, that suggests they're pretty well informed about your whereabouts, doesn't it? They got it all from your diary." "My diary? I've never..." George stopped, blinked, and then winced. "Sod it," he said. "That's really aggravating, that is." Everyone, at some stage of their lives, keeps a diary. Now, the usual reason for doing so is to help you remember, years later, what you did in the past. Trust Lucky George to be different from everybody else. "Where was it?" he asked.
"Long story,"
Bosch replied.
"To cut it short, though, it showed up in Amsterdam about 20 years ago. I think you left it on a tram or something."
"Did I?"
"Not did. Will, I think. Did you ever read it, by the way?"
"What, and find out my future? No fear. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night." Bosch shrugged.
"Anyway," he said, "never mind all that. It showed up, at least. Some of our boys from the spooks department raided some university somewhere and got hold of a copy. The rest is history, if you'll pardon the expression."
George frowned. "Thanks," he said. "Now I owe you one. Has Lundqvist seen it yet, do you know?"
"It's a reasonably safe bet,"
Bosch replied.
"Of course. They've undertaken to call off all their people from persecuting you, so they couldn't have shown him openly. I did hear, though, that once they'd read it, they deposited it in the maximum security vault of the Credit Infernal, with 15 armed guards and a high-tech laser-assisted alarm system. Where Lundqvist's concerned, that's the next best thing to pinning it on the notice board in the staff canteen. He's bound to have seen it. It's also on the database, of course, which is what I'm looking at. But Lundqvist's computer illiterate."
Bosch raised his head, glanced round once more, and added,
"I have an idea. They also know about Nellie, so maybe you'd better—"
George shook his head. "Nah," he said. "That's all right. Nellie can look after herself. Well, thanks a lot, Ronnie. I won't say be seeing you, but take care. Be good."
"Don't worry about it, George. Oh, George."
"Yes."
"You didn't mind me reversing the charges, did you? Only they check the phone bills now and—"
"No problem, Ronnie. Ciao." History, most aggravating of the 9 muses, has forgotten what the favour was that Lucky George did Hieronymus Bosch all those years ago when they were students at Wittenberg together. History's other infuriating habit, apart from forgetting things, is using all the sugar in the communal kitchen and never replacing it. The first thing George did after replacing the receiver was to turn round, very slowly. Nothing untoward happened. Good. Next on the agenda was getting the hell out of town, but there were a couple of things he had to see to first. First Van Appin, then Nellie, or maybe the other way round. He was trying to make a decision on this point on his way downtown when a choice became unnecessary. A girl on a bicycle drew up beside him with a screech of brakes, walloped him on the back and said, "Hello, George." Now then, we want this to be a civilised book. There are some authors, prurient types with the morality of paparazzi, who stoop so low as to eavesdrop on their characters' most private and personal moments and then print the whole lot verbatim. Well, not quite. They do leave some bits out. In all the works of D.H. Lawrence, for example, the girl never once says to the man, "Hold on a minute, my arm's gone to sleep." Nevertheless, standards in this respect are deplorably low. It's time something was done about it. We therefore rejoin the narrative at the moment when Helen of Troy and Lucky George have got over the emotional side of meeting again for the first time in over 400 years and are discussing what they should do next over coffee and pancakes. "It's looking hairy," George said. "Apparently that toad Lundqvist is after me." Helen clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Poor lamb," she said. "What a bore! Is that what all the stuff with the credit cards and the biros and the golf courses was about?" George nodded. "Actually," he added, "I quite enjoyed all that. It's been a long time, you know. You always did have a childish streak.
Maybe.
He shrugged.
Comes in handy. Anyway, it didn't do a blind bit of good. Sure, all the hobgoblins and so on are pulled off the street, but that's neither here nor there. The day I can't sort out a few idiots with pitchforks.
Helen frowned. Be that as it may, she said, had you got something in mind?
Not really. I was thinking of keeping my head down until the lawyer's ready, playing it by the book, that sort of thing. There's no point looking for trouble, after all. I don't want to start a fight if I don't have to.
Helen considered this as she finished her pancake. Somehow, I don't think it's going to be as easy as that, she said. Besides, if turning all the traffic lights in Milan into sunflowers isn't starting a fight, it'll probably do to be going on with. That's always been your trouble, George, she added sternly. Too much of this silly artistic integrity stuff. By way of reply, George simply grinned.
All this, he said, changing the subject, may look to you like aggravation, but to me, it's more like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Helen of Troy applied her mind in the search for the appropriate word. Extreme danger, she hazarded. George shook his head.
Fun. That's the word I'm looking for.
Fun?
Fun.
Helen broke off a corner of bread to mop up the last of the maple syrup. Breaking out of hell, she said, being hunted across the face of the earth by the most deadly contract killer history has ever known, who, incidentally, has a personal grudge against you. If that's your idea of the meaning of fun, I suggest you sue the compilers of your dictionary.
George shrugged. I get what you're driving at, he replied. In a way. On the other hand, he said, smiling at the empty coffee pot, compared to what I've been doing for the last 400 years, it's absolutely bloody hysterical.
Helen gave him a what in a poor light could have been mistaken for a serious look. And what have you been doing, George? She demanded.
Time.
Funny old stuff. Time. There is notoriously a lot of it about, but it is, of course, a finite resource. This could have been a problem. Back in the Dark Ages, pre-ecology, the powers that be had the curious notion that they could go on pumping the stuff out indefinitely. Plenty more like this where this came from, they reassured themselves, as they gaily sank new boreholes and erected giant new rigs. But they were wrong. Time, like everything else, is running out. Not that you'd know it if you went by the commodities markets. Just now, for example, overproduction has led to serious gluts. The price has accordingly tumbled. They're practically giving the stuff away with free wine glasses. This state of affairs, however, can't last, of course, and the wiser heads are already planning for the day when the wells run dry. They're also at last grasping the nettle of what to do with all the enormous dumps of used time which litter up the underprivileged backlots of the sixth dimension, slowly rotting their half-lives away and doing awful things to the environment. This stuff, they say, can be recycled. All we need is a little more research, one little teeny-tiny breakthrough. Which is rather like saying that death can be cured just as soon as we can find a way of making people live forever. I'm sorry, the receptionist said. Nobody can see Mr. Van Erpen without an appointment. The mirror sunglasses stared back at her, and she wriggled slightly.
That's okay, said the man in the shades. Seeing him is not essential. Just so long as I can kick his liver out through his ears, I'll pass up on the visual contact.
Before she could press the panic button, Lundqvist leant over, ripped the wires out with a tiny flick of the wrist, wrapped them round a couple of pencils, and presented them to her corsage fashion. Then he kicked in the door.
"Mugger Kurt,"
said Mr. Van Appen, not looking up.
"Great to see you. Take a seat. I'll be with you in just a—" Shit, Lundqvist thought. I'm getting slow. He'd managed to get the drawer open 2 millimeters before I grabbed him. "Help yourself to a revolver,"
Mr. Van Appin said.
I usually have one myself about this time.
Lundqvist smiled without humour, removed the revolver from the drawer and pocketed it. Then he leant forward, thrusting his chin under Van Appin's nose.
So,
Mr. Van Appin said,
what can I do for you? Thinking of making a will, perhaps?
Lundqvist shook his head.
You should,
Van Appin said.
Dodgy business like yours. I'd have said it was a very sensible precaution. Thinking of buying a house, then?
This time, Lundqvist didn't shake his head. For variety, he shook Mr. Van Appin's.
Shall I take that?
Remarked Mr. Van Appin, spitting out the syllables like a boxer spitting teeth.
As a negative? Where is he? Who? Faust.
Mr. Van Appin smiled, his professional smile, which does not mean, hello, I like you, shall we be friends? Quite the opposite, in fact.
I'm sorry, he said. Mr. Faust is my client, and I cannot disclose confidential information, and, he continued quickly, just in case you were contemplating being so ill-mannered as to threaten me with bodily injury, may I just remind you that I practice law in all the major centuries simultaneously, and I include your present employers among my most valued clients. One false move out of you, and I'll have an injunction out to stop you ever having been born before you can say chronological dysfunction.
He paused and gave Lundqvist a patronising grin.
In your case, he added, that's probably being over-ambitious. Do you think you could manage Jack Robinson?
There was a long pause.
You think you're really smart, don't you?
Mr. Van Appin looked modest.
In the same way that I think cold is the opposite of hot, and that water is wet. Yes, I do. Fine.
The telephone at Mr. Van Appin's elbow rang.
Answer it. It's for you.
For a moment the lawyer hesitated. Then he picked up the phone.
Yes, he said. Van Appin here.
Likewise, this is Van Appin of Van Appin, 15th Century and Company. Hiya, partner. How's things your end?
Mr. Van Appin blinked twice.
Fine, he said. We're doing okay. A bit different from your day, of course. We're doing more in the commercial property line, and not so much of the witchcraft trials. But we make a living. What can I do for you?
It's like this, partner. I'm speaking to you from the maternity ward here in AD 1449, where Mr. Kurt Lundqvist is just about to be born.
If Mr. Van Appin was thrown by this remark, he didn't let it show.
It's a small world,
he remarked.
You can say that again, because I have Mr. Kurt Lundqvist with me right now. I've tried explaining to him that he's risking setting off a really serious temporal paradox just by being here, but it's hampering me having this cheese wire around my throat, you know.
Mr. Van Appin, 20th Century, nodded slowly.
I can relate to that, he said. I would most strongly advocate not making any sudden movements.
I was working along the same lines myself. I'd also appreciate it a whole lot if you told Mr. Lundqvist what he wants to know.
Mr. Van Appin frowned.
I hear what you say, he replied. I'm just wondering how that would leave us from a professional ethics viewpoint.
There was a gurgling noise from the telephone, and for a brief moment Mr. Van Appin was aware of a most curious sensation, that of vaguely remembering that he didn't, in fact, exist, having died many, many years previously.
I think we're just going to have to take a view on that one, really. I think we have a serious conflict of interest situation here, and maybe it's time we took a more flexible approach vis-a-vis the strict interpretation.
There was a particularly vivid flashback which made Mr. Van Appin wince sharply. It wasn't so much the physical pain, or the fear, or the horror. It was the thought of the catastrophic effects that having been unwittingly dead for 500 years while continuing to trade would have on his tax position that decided him.
What you're saying,
he therefore gurgled into the receiver,
is that maybe this is an instance where we would, or should, interpret the statute in its wider sense, having regard to all the circumstances and implications of the case.
Absolutely, partner. I would also recommend doing it rather quickly, because otherwise...
The sentence was not completed. Mr. Van Appen, tearing himself away from a rather fascinating recollection of his own funeral, nodded sharply 3 or 4 times.
"Okay," he said, "you got it. I'll tell him right away. Oh, and by the way..."
Yes.
"You'll never guess who didn't even bother sending a wreath or anything."
The line went dead, and by dint of some rapid talking, Mr. Van Appen narrowly avoided the sincerest form of flattery. Lucky George came out of the phone booth, stopped, turned back, and smiled at the coin slot, which promptly disgorged slightly more loose change than he'd originally fed into it. Slightly more, only because there's a limit to the amount of coins one man can conveniently carry, or one government can comfortably produce.
"Right," he said. "That's got that sorted. What do you fancy doing the rest of the day? If you like, we could go to the Reich Museum and wake up some of the paintings."
Helen frowned. "Hold on," she said. "When you say that's sorted..."
"I mean," George replied, "I've taken care of things. For now, anyway. Some friends of mine owe me just a few favours. Things will be okay. You'll see."
"In that case," Helen said, "let's go eat. I'm hungry." One of George's telephone calls had been made to a small family-run Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. Mrs. Loredano had taken the call. "Hi, Lorenzo," she called, over the rumble of simmering pans. "It's for you, some guy called Buonaventura." There was a crash as Mr. Loredano dropped 4 helpings of osso buco, 2 garlic breads, and a side salad.
"Giorgio Buonaventura?"
"Yeah, you know him."
"Give me the phone."
Mrs. Loredano shrugged, handed over the receiver, and went for the broom.
"Larry?"
"George," replied Mr. Loredano, with slightly too much emphasis on the ecstatic happiness. "Hey, it's been a long time. What are you doing out?"
"I absconded, Larry, and got bored. How's things?"
"Fine, George, fine. Couldn't be better."
"Business okay?"
"Oh, you know, times are hard. Not much money about. And then there's the overhead."
"Sure."
The voice on the other end of the line hardened slightly, like a carbon deposit suddenly subjected to billions of tons of top pressure.
"Listen, Larry, I need a favour. Can you drop everything?"
"I just did."
"Sorry?"
"Nothing. I'm just taking off my apron, George. I'll be right with you."
"That's wonderful, Larry. Mike there too?"
"Sure," Mr. Loredano replied. "I'll tell him to come too. Where are you?" As George explained, Mr. Loredano made notes on his order pad. After a few more cordial exchanges, he replaced the phone, removed his apron, and called his wife. "Honey," he said, "me and Mike, we gotta go out for a while."
"Business?"
Mrs. Loredano expressed herself, stating her opinion of this suggestion. Her husband stopped her. I know, he said. "Sure, that was George on the line." The penny dropped. "We'll be back as soon as we can," Mr. Loredano assured her.
"Don't give any credit while we're away."
He then found his business partner and explained, whereupon both men retired to the back office and changed for the journey.
"You ready, Mike?" "Ready as I'll ever be."
"Window open?"
"Yeah."
"See you there, then." The 2 proprietors of La Veneziana then spread their wings, squawked a few times, and flitted out the window. 10 minutes later, they were midway across the Atlantic, slowed down by a strong headwind and driving rain from the southeast. Not bad going, nevertheless, for a pair of superficially ordinary herring gulls, particularly when you bear in mind that they'd been out of practice for 400 years. Mrs. Loredano, meanwhile, was explaining to Mrs. Steno why their respective husbands had abandoned the restaurant at the height of the midday rush. She knew all about it, having been let in on the secret some years ago, and besides, she believed that a good marriage is built on mutual trust. Mrs. Steno, who believed that a good marriage is built on unilateral terrorism, hadn't been favoured with her husband's confidence in this regard. Mrs. Loredano explained that many years ago, before they went into the restaurant business, Larry and Mike had worked for this guy back in the old country. What as? Well, as familiars. No, not that. That's a valet. Familiars are those guys who help out sorcerers and magicians. Yeah, hand them the top hat and get sawn in half. You know, that sort of thing. And other things too, of course. Yeah, usually it's some bimbo with no claws on, but sometimes it's men as well. And sometimes, here Mrs. Loredano took a deep breath, it's seagulls. Seagulls? You mean like performing animals? Yeah, only more than that. Sometimes. She explained further. It took Mrs. Steno just a little bit of time to recover. You mean, she said, Mike and Larry are seagulls? Yes, well, were seagulls, but then the guy they were working for, pause for thought, when he retired, he turned them into human beings, regular guys, even set them up in the restaurant business. A very thoughtful man by all accounts. The guy really knew how to look after his employees. Seagulls? Catholic seagulls, Rosa. I absolutely guarantee that. Almost the first thing they did after getting their human bodies, they went out and got baptized. You've got absolutely nothing to worry about on that score. Anyway, part of the deal was that if ever this Mr. Buenaventura needed them again for anything in the familiaring line, then of course they'd be only too pleased. A matter of honour. You've got to have respect in this life, or what have you got? Yes, but seagulls? At which point Mrs. Loredano became slightly affronted. No offence intended, but she hoped Mrs. Steno wasn't prejudiced in any way, because that wasn't a very nice thing to be. After all, everybody's something, if you go back far enough. Italian, Jewish, Irish, German, Chinese, seagull, Greek, whatever. Bring us your huddled masses. Had Mrs. Steno taken a look at the Statue of Liberty lately, by the way? There was a long silence. Sorry, Maria, said Mrs. Steno. That's okay, Rosa, replied Mrs. Loredano. Just forget it, okay? They went and tossed the salad. Is that a euphemism? Oh my goodness, I love this book so much. So things are getting a bit lively. What will happen? So we got the two kind of like lead fellas. We've got our Carl Lundqvist and we've got Lucky George, and now we've got a wonderful array of supporting characters, which is absolutely outstanding. We like this. We like this very, very much indeed. So yes, we have a lot going on, as usual, so I will be doing my best for you over the next couple of weeks to get this to you. As I said, there's a really long chapter coming up in Chapter 8. Chapter 6 is quite short, that'll be no problem. Chapter 7 is quite short, no problem. But Chapter 8, oh my goodness, it's hefty. But we've got this. And apologies for the dog's bark, and I had to have my window open today because it was freezing cold, and I had to get this recording done. And there's so much going on. And so, if you can have a look-see, if you would like, that's the neighbour dogs. I normally have my window closed, you see, or don't record when they're saying hello. But their owner is deaf. So they unfortunately do leave them outside throughout the day. And that's why I've got this room set up in the middle room. And I've also got the front bedroom set up as well. So when there's too much noise out the back here, I record in the front bedroom. When there's too much noise outside the front, I come out the back. I do live in a very rural village, a little rural village in the northeast of England. And normally it's very quiet. But in recent weeks, these have been a bit noisy, but it's okay because everybody should look after their babies as far as I'm concerned, and sometimes you can't really hear what they're saying to you, especially if you're deaf. Yes, but yeah, I wonder if there's a thing where when a dog barks it can have a vibration, because when it sets off my two, and I am whiffling here, I must apologise, but I've actually got a thing on my Alexa that when my dogs bark it starts playing music, like soothing music. And what's really funny is, you're going to like this one. Sorry, I'm really going on a bit of a ramble right now. See, when it comes down to dogs and animals, I can talk forever. But if somebody comes to the back door to deliver a parcel, and here in the northeast, you don't really use your front door unless it's for posh visitors, and then they get seen into the posh front room. But anyway, I digress. But if somebody goes to the back door or that sort of thing to deliver a parcel, and they're like, rah, 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 And then if the postman comes to the front door, not a freaking peep out of them. But a gnat farts in Timbuktu out the front of the house. Rah, 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 rah. But a postman actually comes to the front door, not a peep. Go figure. It's like, why is it they accept the postman? They're like, yeah, whatever. And yet if the delivery driver comes to the back door, they're like, rah, rah, rah. You know, do they think that somebody's actually going to come in through the back door? Anyway, sorry, that was a real waffle. Please excuse me. Oh my goodness me. So, as I said, if you can let me know if you have a preference as to which Grimm's fairy tale we should start off with, or if you're happy for me just to run with it. If you have any ideas, maybe we could do a Mad Libs thing, where we could, is it Mad Libs? I'm not sure. Where we can say, right, if you do this story in the style of this, like they used to do on Whose Line It Is Anyway, and then see if we can do it a bit differently, just to kind of make it a bit fun and a bit funny. And then we can do a live recording of it, or do a live stream of it, and then make a little series of them. And I also, don't forget, I've got one story, 2 stories, I think, to read out for you guys. So it's your own anecdotes. More than happy to read them out too, because I think they're freaking lovely. So please, if you want to email me them, or if you want to put them in comments, then that's fine. No problem. I'm going to stop whiffling now, because I've been whiffling for far too long in relation to the book. So hopefully get another chapter to you in the next couple of days. As I said, there is a lot going on. We do these things and we puddle along, and new medication, she says extra medication. I've got 2 extra medications to have from this week, which is going to be fun, but hopefully we'll be able to keep recording, and that's what I'd like to do, because it makes me happy. And I know I've said it multiple times, but I really am going to stop recording now. So take it easy. Look after yourselves. Thank you for indulging me. I do appreciate you guys very, very, very much. It's a joy and it's a pleasure to make these for you. So if you can, hit the like button, notifications bell, only share and subscribe if you want to, but it's always very much appreciated, as it really helps the channel. Yes, and please leave a comment and let me know how you're doing, how are things. Genuinely care about what's going on, especially in these tumultuous times. So as I said, nice little bit of escapism here, that we can chat about everything and anything under the sun, just not politics or religion. Anyway, take it easy, take care, look after yourselves, and we will mend it, we will fix it, we will stick it with scissors and glue. Wow. I can't even remember what that tune is. Anyway, catch you later. Oh my goodness gracious. And remember, I'm sorry, likewise, I do have promo codes available for the books that I record for Audible. You can get a free listen on those. Might not be your jam, might not be your taste, but there's 48 to choose from. So it's from fantasy to cosy mystery to some dark horror, which but as I said, if you're interested, drop me a line via email and I'll give you a promo code as well. And all I ask for is, if you want to rate it, awesome. If you want to review it, awesome. But you don't have to. Just enjoy it. Just enjoy it for what it is. And if you don't dig it, just yeet it. No loss there, because it's just a promo code. So all good and gravy. Anyway, now I will seriously stop whiffling.